Welcome to the FilmSEEN podcast.
Hey, Bobby, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Zeth. How are you doing?
Pretty good. I know we're recording this cast.
All things relative. All things relative.
Right, relative. You know, we're recording this in the middle of the COVID-19 epidemic, and I'm saying it's the middle of the epidemic, but the truth is we don't even know if we've reached the halfway point or what stage of this thing that we're in, right?
No, I mean, I don't know how we would know or how we will know, right? You know,
Yeah.
It makes all I'm doing good, I'm doing fine, all that becomes very, very relative, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's there's too many things to say about that.
But the good news is we have fun things to talk about and good movies to break down.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know, one of the things that we have to talk about is that Bobby's a screenwriter, and we've been co-writing a project called Sustenance together.
Yeah.
And the talks of that were before this whole crisis, but, you know, we've been doing a lot of co-writing during this process, remotely, of course.
Right. And you know, it's obviously not ideal, but all things considered, I think it's great to have a long-term thing that you can kind of come back to each day with all this to kind of, you know, at least see it adding up to something for you in some respect, right? At the end of the day, you know, I have 45 pages, now 48 pages, you know, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. It's a way to keep our sanity.
It's almost a version of like carving the day tallies on the wall, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Bobby, and I'm not even sure if I know the answer. Did you always want to write screenplays? I know that you studied writing and screenwriting specifically at Johns Hopkins, but were you ever considering becoming some other sort of writer, or you always knew that you wanted to become a screenwriter?
You know, I might not know the answer to that either. I can kind of trace back an interest in it pretty far ways, but I don't know exactly what moment it was that spiked that interest to something that I was actively pursuing. I know that kind of from the moment I went into college as a writing major in general, and I was looking for another subject to kind of pair with it, either to hedge bets on getting a job or just something else I was interested in. I don't know. But I kind of went around to a few departments early on, and I guess, you know, fell in love immediately with the first film course that I took. It was great, and I just sort of knew maybe in a matter of weeks that was something I wanted to really dive into. And then the natural combination of those two things was screenwriting. But me and my friends would, you know, we'd joke about like writing like some sitcom or something together back in high school. And actually, this is kind of funny in hindsight, but I remember in study hall in middle school, I would like on just pen and paper write like little scripts for like a 7th grade parody of The Office for like me and my friends.
That's so funny
to do, which we never did, of course, but it was just sort of a fun way to kill 20 minutes.
Were you into both the British and American versions of the show?
You know, I have seen the British versions, and all due respect to them, I think that they're brilliant at what they do. It's just I find the American version so much. I mean, the American version, it's the most popular show in 21st century TV. It's I still, you know, see every episode 5,000 times and love it.
Nice.
So the British version is great for what it is, but it's not something that I'm always eager to go back and rewatch, because it's just, you know, the nature of the comedy is.
I've never seen a full episode
cringy.
of the British version, to be honest with you.
It's great. It's great, but it's not easy to watch.
It's just a different thing.
Yeah, because it's the cringiest moments of The Office just dialed up to 11 and stretched out for, you know, as long as they possibly can. It's great at what it's doing, but I was addicted to the American version.
Nice, man. And what first drew you into filmmaking in general?
I don't know.
And I know from conversations with you that you do have a pretty extensive frame of reference with films, and you've seen a lot of old films, and some of them we'll talk about later on. So you were always you've been a fan of cinema, it sounds like, for a long time.
Yeah, I guess, and sort of in any reasonable answer to this question would say that I've had a pretty strong interest in movies for pretty much my entire life. I remember, you know, an early childhood memory of mine is when it was like, I don't know, it was like 6 or 7 or something, and my parents, it was New Year's Eve, and my parents, you know, changed all the clocks so that I would think that 9 o'clock was really midnight, and I stayed up till midnight on New Year's Eve. But when that night we watched, I remember that was the night I saw North by Northwest for the first time. And so
awesome.
growing up, we were always watching Hitchcock films and stuff like that. I have always had a really strong affinity for it. I would say it wasn't until college that I became interested more seriously as a pursuit, and certainly became interested in the practice of it. I do remember, it was something that I've been a part of my interest set for a very long time. Although it was not the way that I kind of got into writing, which was actually through poetry at first, and then into short fiction, and then into screenwriting. But that evolution happened very quickly.
And were you reading a lot of poetry as well as writing poetry?
Yeah, that started for me as a teenager, and kind of just stumble across either in school or out of school, like some new poet, new writer, and get really, really into it, and sort of, like kind of just like learning how to walk in terms of writing, like just try to do exactly what they were doing. And then I read back those things like 5 years later. It's like, oh my goodness, this is barely even legible. It's, obviously not something that kind of stands on anything like its own 2 feet, but is first interests in those areas, and yeah, I mean, it all sort of evolved from there. I still am interested in that, but I haven't been writing very much poetry or prose fiction.
Not even squeezing in a haiku here and there?
Oh man, I used to feel like it's a totally different like frame of mind that you have to be in to kind of make those switches. Although, like, I don't know.
I know what you mean. I used to write, which was kind of poetic because it's rhyming. I used to write a lot of lyrics, like song lyrics, which could be. Oh,
that was another thing that was. I got super into that in middle school. Yeah.
Nice. And where'd you grow up, Bobby?
I grew up in Ridgewood, New Jersey. I would say I'm probably definitely a child of the aught. Going to school in the, I guess, post 9/11 northern New Jersey sphere. Yeah.
Definitely a crazy time to grow up, but also it does sound like you came from an interesting family that encouraged watching cinema and things like that. If you were watching North by Northwest at such a young age, and that sort of thing, that's pretty cool. So was your family really into films and movies?
Well, yeah, in each in their own way. I think my mom really loves the classical era and Hitchcock and stuff like that, and she's so like kind and empathetic that she just can't stand violence on screen at all, and she just gravitates towards those those great old movies where that's kind of not so much the thing, right?
Yeah, which is good. See, because my mom also doesn't like watching violent things, but she ends up watching the Hallmark Channel a lot. So we don't exactly have the same taste in movies.
Oh man, so that's kind of what movies were on a lot when I was growing up. We fire up an old Hitchcock or Frank Capra or something.
That's pretty cool.
And that's kind of been old film noir or something.
Yeah.
That's been a base of mine. It's sort of a home base for my film interests for ever. Yeah.
I grew up, spent a lot of time with my grandparents when I was growing up, and which, they were Albanian immigrants, and they worked as superintendents in Manhattan, but because they were supers, it meant that they had cable in their house. And so every night I used to watch HBO. And it was just like a tradition to watch like some sort of movie that was on. And so I got exposed to a lot of great films that way from a young age. Just,
Nice.
It felt like every film that I watched when I was a kid was great,
I know, right? Isn't it nice just not having any ability to be like negative about a film when you're a kid, and you get like, that was great, that other one was great, they're all great. They're all
right, exactly. That's how I felt. Yeah. So then what? So you took that course in college. There must have been a good professor in that film course.
Oh, it was great. She and I become good friends, and
that's
she's kind
awesome.
of a mentor to the whole department, really.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, it was something that I always liked movies and stories, and I was a really, really big reader as a kid. I would read a lot more than I do now, which is kind of puts me to shame.
Yeah, sometimes it's a time thing. I used to read a lot more as well.
Yeah. I don't know what it was, but so that was always something I liked and was interested in. And then kind of on getting to college and thinking more seriously about, well, what do I want to dive into as a long-term pursuit and actually take it seriously and try to do it. It kind of all, I don't want to say it fell into place exactly because I don't know, there's still choices you have to make, but it really just felt so natural and yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
Not that I was certainly not a natural to it. I had a lot to and I still have a lot to figure out, but it just, it was one of those things where even in the sort of down moments, you're just like, well, I have to do this. I know that you've talked about your interest in film sort of being just like a given fact, and not something that you really feel like you have that much of a say in. It's kind of, I think, that way for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is that way for sure. There's something. It's like a compulsion almost. Something that drives you in that direction, you feel driven to, it's like, even if I didn't want to do this, I have to do this somehow.
Mm-hmm.
But I love it.
Yeah.
And
yeah, because when it's going great, it's so much fun, right? When it's going well, at least.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was always interested in films and movies and watching them. But I didn't pursue it. Unlike you, I didn't really pursue it in college. I actually ended up studying business because it just felt like at the time, like, oh, that's not for us, That's a pipe dream. That's not for people like me, which, it's just my own limited beliefs. Nobody had said that to me. It just felt that way because I guess I just didn't know enough, And also I had taken a class at the School of Visual Arts when I was in high school on the weekends, like a directing course. And we would watch movies like Citizen Kane. And there was a great professor there that really taught us a lot. And actually the 16-year-old me felt daunted by how much work was involved in filmmaking. I was like, wait a minute. It encompasses all this. I'm like, this is just, I don't know if I can handle it, But then when you get older and then you start to actually develop a work ethic and you start to get into different things. I was doing welding iron work, and then you start to realize, well, a lot of things are a lot of work.
Right.
Like most career paths, if you really want to take them seriously, are an incredible amount of work. So you might as well then gravitate toward the thing that you actually feel passionate about.
Yeah. Well,
like
I think my sort of saving grace in that respect was not figuring out how much work it was until I was already like way into it. I'm like, well,
at the point of no return.
Here,
Yeah. That's probably pretty good. Yeah, but I guess that was my realization then later on. I was like, wait a minute. Like a lot of things are a lot of work, so you might as well gravitate toward the thing that you actually want to do.
Well, because that's what's going to keep you interested and going, and in my experience, like you can do kind of any amount of work towards something that you love and that you want to do and you care about. But even, there are some things that like I would just not want to put effort into at all if you don't like the thing you're doing. If you don't like the effort, if you don't like the outcome, it's just 100 times harder to sort of try in the way that you're going to need to do anything, Yeah.
Now, and I know, so for those of you that don't know, which is most of you, I first met Bobby because he was an intern at Alphabet City Films, and then we ended up keeping in touch and being friends, and now collaborators. And I like to give.
That was what, 5 years ago?
Yeah, about that.
Yeah. My first ever job job in quotes. My first ever sort of experience in the professional film setting was I interned at Big Beach Films,
which is a great company that made
great
Little Miss Sunshine and
great experience, great people,
and so many other great movies. Safety Not Guaranteed, which is a movie that I really loved.
And even more recently, since I left there, they more recently did The Farewell, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood.
Fantastic film. The Farewell was so great.
I still have to see that one.
Oh man, you have to see it.
I meant to see that all last summer. I meant to see that, and I never got around to it, and I'm mad at myself now.
Yeah, you're in for a treat. That's a good one.
I got to make that happen. Yeah, but
so what did you do for Big Beach? I know that you read scripts over there.
Yeah, well, and for my experience there, as I think is the case for a lot of internships at production companies, there's kind of two halves to it. One is the odds and ends, internship 101, right? If something needs doing, be available, be on hand. If someone needs either an errand run, something delivered, something picked up, or just sort of help around the office, cleaning things out, all the stuff that you do when you're an intern, right? And then the other side of that is more film specific, was coverage reports. And those are another staple of a lot of film internships. Production companies, even small ones, even ones much, even ones that are kind of just barely getting off the ground, get a lot of scripts.
That's true.
They get a lot of scripts sent in from a lot of people. And usually, if they're a big enough company to have interns, those are who reads that first, right? And there's all different kinds of cases, but usually the interns are sort of the first line of defense against the bad script, really.
But how often is it that a great script is just going to come from somebody that's unsolicited? Does that ever even happen at a company like Big Beach Films?
Well, it's interesting because there's a lot of different reasons why a script would sort of come across your desk. Some scripts are solicited. Some scripts are going around, and they know that that they're interested. Some scripts they might be bidding on or trying to get, and they're just trying to get as many eyes on them as possible. And those tend to be the really good vetted professional scripts that they're reading in this office, they're reading across the street, they're reading down the block, trying to compete for the project. So that has happened. Other times it'll be a script that they're not interested in the script per se, but they're interested in the writer. A lot of production companies keep tabs on writers either coming out of like grad school or writers who have done some work in the past who they think might be kind of, this might be a fit for what we do. So there were several quite good scripts that I read where they're just, keep an eye on this person. What can they do well? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Not so much about what does the script one-to-one do for us. Then there's the category of just completely unsolicited. Someone, just sort of hit the contact button on their website and sent in the script. Those tended to not be very good.
Right. But they still got read.
They still get read. Or at least I can say that where I was, they did. I know that some places, really, really big places, I'm sure that the volume is such that, scripts just would go straight to the trash can.
There's got to be once in a blue where, just if you were just looking at sheer numbers, that a nugget of gold comes in with all the shit.
For sure. I think, though, that usually by the time, you know what it is so much? It's not so much a writing ability test as it is a professionalism test, right? Usually the people who are really kind of the pros or on track to be the pros or something like that, they'll usually go through some process that isn't just sending it in cold to a production company.
That makes sense.
Because
I've never even sent a script cold, and I receive a lot of cold scripts. Mm-hmm. But even in the early days when I didn't know anybody in the industry and I didn't really know what the hell I was doing, I don't think I ever just randomly. I never ever did the random, hey, let me just send out my scripts to random production companies. Here you go. Here's a PDF of my script.
Right.
Enjoy.
Right.
And then
because I know that places have policies of we don't accept unsolicited scripts, right? Because if you think of taking any Big Beach or any other indie production company, even a big indie production company like A24 or something, they can make how many movies a year? 3, 4, right? Like they got to, and they're going to get 3 or 4, I don't know, 3 or 4,000 submissions, right? And
True.
So they're not going to pick out of that huge pile to make something that isn't vouched for, something that isn't, something they don't have a point of contact for.
Yeah.
Extremely unlikely.
That makes perfect sense. But I think it's important to also educate people that are younger, that are starting out in the process, or just people that don't know, that are interested. So it's important things to talk about.
Well, I think that there's still a memory out there of a time when that kind of was the way stuff worked. In the 90s, I know that was never a very high odds proposition, but you would hear really high profiles of like Shane Black sending a script in spec and getting it made.
I didn't know that, actually. I know that he got started at such a young age, and he made Lethal Weapon or something when he was like 23. I didn't know that it was
That's exactly what that was.
That's amazing.
And he got like $1 million cash for that script,
wow.
Right? And then he was sort of on his way,
Yeah.
But that's sort of, there's a memory of that out there, I think, in the collective understanding of how this works. But, those times are not with us anymore, if they ever really were.
Yeah. No,
but, there are a lot of other things. Yeah, sorry, but there are a lot of other things besides production companies that are great to send scripts cold to. All sorts of workshops and programs, and there's a million things that are excellent to send scripts cold to. So that's not a sort of admonition. If anyone's listening and I have a script under their pillow, just keep it there. No, there's great ways to send it out and work up to the point where you're not sending it cold.
Right. That's so true. That's a good point. That's been my experience too. There's so many different industry events. There's opportunities where you can meet people, and then it's not quite, you're just sending it cold with some paragraph. I don't think I've ever even read them. I receive them a lot, all the time. And then sometimes it's a very awkward, here's the story of a family in the South that's like the mafia, but they're hillbillies and they're trying to claw their way up to power and blah, blah, blah. And it's based off a true story. And this is my family's life. It is like, here's the PDF. It's like, I'm sorry, who are you? Like,
that's wild. That is wild.
And then people forget that when they're sending these things in, they're sending them to people, it's so, and a big part of this business is relationships. So building that rapport is so important. Sometimes it happens over time. It's not something that just happens overnight.
Yeah. I think 9 times out of 10, it happens over time and over a period of meeting a person multiple times and developing a relationship and stuff like that, for sure. And I do this so far from perfectly, it's ridiculous, but I think that's sort of one thing that writers, maybe we don't, not that it doesn't come naturally, but we sort of aren't always inclined to just get out there in that way.
Oh,
right?
it's a socialize in that sort of way. Yeah, because writing itself is such a solitary sort of art.
Yeah, you want to like bury in a project a lot of the time, and it's funny. Like one of the things that I am learning at this moment, even is filmmaking is a combination of 1,000 different things, none of which are filmmaking.
I mean, I've learned that myself over the years. It's like, think about how often I'm on set versus how often I'm doing other things, whether it's in pre-production,
right,
post-production, all sorts of things. But, the amount of actual on-set time percentage-wise is very small.
For sure. Well, I remember I was PAing a commercial at a hospital, and these 2 doctors there were talking to the director and the I think the ad guy from the agency, and they were like, "So how long have you been working on this piece?" About 4 or 5 months. And how long is the piece going to be? About 3 minutes. So you're boiling 4 months of work down to just get 3 minutes of a final cut, and the set to on-set ratio of that is just ridiculous.
That is.
But that's the way it is. That's the way it works.
That's a big reason why I try to pick a lot of people's brains, because there might be actors that have been on sets, they've been doing television work for years and years and years, and they've logged countless hours on sets. They're production designers, every facet in the industry. I always try to do deep dives and pick their brains about their experiences. And, that's a big reason I love podcasting, because I just have a naturally curious mind with a lot of different things, and especially when it comes to the industry, different people's positions and experiences, because you can learn a lot that way.
For sure.
And it's fascinating. And then you also, I mean, specific to learning a lot, you learn, sometimes it's important to learn what not to do. And, so you don't have to make those mistakes the hard way. And if certain
Oh
things
yeah,
could
of
be
course,
avoided, you're like, oh, well, I didn't even think about that, because,
of course.
that's the good things about the times that we're living in, because there's kind of, I mean, the amount of knowledge that you could learn almost like from primary sources is sort of unprecedented because of the internet, because of just
Oh
watching
yeah,
interviews on YouTube, as well as reading articles and things like that.
absolutely, absolutely. And sort of in the position that I am in, as someone kind of just getting their feet a little wet in the past couple of years, starting out, like that's like invaluable to have as just a way of knowing something.
Yeah,
As
exactly.
opposed to knowing nothing when you show up on day one, right? Like,
That's
because
why
those are the options.
exactly, man. That's why I start when I was first starting out, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know, anybody, but I was watching tons and tons and tons of movies and DVDs, and then with the audio commentary from the directors and them talking about their experiences. And I remember watching, I think, Hard 8, Paul Thomas Anderson's movie, and he was
It's a
like,
really good movie, yeah.
great movie, and he goes in the commentary, he's like, I'm doing this commentary, but he's like, you have to realize I'm a director that's learned a lot from watching audio commentaries, because I had laser discs, back in the day. He's like, I used to watch laser discs with the director's commentary. I'm like, whoa, that's pretty cool that even Paul Thomas Anderson learned a lot. So, things like that.
I had to do that. That sounds like I've really very rarely done the audio commentary.
Oh man, because now it's becoming a lost art, because
streaming, it's really hard to find.
Right, true. I always wish there was a company that the streaming services would start implementing that, because why wouldn't I would watch like a Netflix movie with the audio commentary,
Well, you know what did do that? That was really cool, and I have to check if it's sort of more recent iteration did that. Remember FilmStruck before Criterion Channel existed?
I've heard of FilmStruck, but I never watched it, and I don't know much about it. I've definitely heard of it though.
It was so great. It was basically Criterion Channel before Criterion Channel.
Gotcha.
It was sort of, I mean that very literally. It was the Criterion Channel. The Criterion Collection was a part of it.
Gotcha.
And then it I think it was run by Turner or Warner Brothers, something, and whatever big studio behind it, whatever big studio was behind it, chose to shut it down, and then Criterion Channel came out of that. So I actually haven't checked if Criterion Channel does this, but FilmStruck would do this thing where there was either you could choose to watch it with either director's commentary, or even watch it with like film analysis from like critics and scholars and things like that.
That's amazing.
Within the streaming service. Really cool. Yeah.
That's so cool, because I've even watched older films that, the directors have passed away, but you'll have some like chair of a film department, or, like a known film critic doing the audio commentary. Like, I think I've, definitely watched certain French New Wave films that way, and, like certain old films, and you learn a lot that way as well.
Yeah.
When you were working at Big Beach, did you ever have any encounters with like Mark Turtletaub or Peter Saraff or any of like those guys? Did anybody ever like give you like a good piece of advice? Like, did you ever like what was like your biggest takeaway? Like, what did you learn?
Oh yeah. Well, just sort of big picture. I was 18 when I started that. So the biggest thing I learned was just like, how to get up and go to an office every day, and do a office job and sort of acclimate to that kind of space, right?
Yeah, no, those soft skills are important too. Dealing with people and just like little things about what is professionalism.
For sure. And so that was the biggest thing, and it was my first taste of my first of many tastes of commuting into New York. But as far as discrete advice, I did I would meet and sort of have conversations over sort of office lunches with those producers there, and they're very nice. I remember I think the best piece of advice, though, I got to give credit. I think he's a producer there now, but he was the office manager at the time, and he was kind of one of the people who oversaw the interns. A guy named Josh Cohen there, who I asked him advice about making shorts because I was interested in doing something through a student grant program that my school had that I wound up doing a few years later. And I know he had recently produced a student film, and one thing he told me for writing in particular was like, and it's one of the things that you'll hear a lot at lower levels of writing, but so important to know is number one, write for your limitations. You know, don't think that you can just sort of figure it out later when you could just figure it out on the page. Write for what you'll be able to produce, right? You know, no big costume drama period pieces for the first micro budget, whatever, right?
For sure, it is important to write with budget in mind, for sure.
And he also told me another thing that I really like as a piece of advice. You know, in short form, you know, think of what the shortest kind of story, what the shortest sort of form a story can take is. It's like it's a joke. You know, a horse walks into a bar, bartender says, "Why the long face?" There's sort of that turn that smells like a story in there. And so I think the other thing he said is don't try to be too, don't try to write something too dramatic or something War and Peace or something like that in a 7-minute, 5-minute short, whatever. So those were great things to hear for a person who is just starting to screenwrite, who has tendencies to be excessive in all of those respects.
Fantastic advice and pragmatic advice as well, which is really great.
Absolutely. So that one, I remember those two things stuck with me. Yeah, but there's so much to take from early experiences like that.
At this point, I'd like to go into the second portion of the podcast where we talk about 2 of your favorite films, and specifically 2 of your favorite movie scenes from any 2 films.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm so excited.
Well, which is the one that you want to talk about first? I know which ones they are because you mentioned them to me yesterday. So I know maybe we'll talk about The Third Man.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's dive into The Third Man.
Movies of all time.
And I have to give Bobby the credit because I'd heard of The Third Man, of course, and I thought I had watched it when I was much, much younger. I don't think I gave it a proper watching because I watched it more recently and completely loved it. And it was as if I was watching it for the first time. So thank you, Bobby, for really putting that movie back on my radar.
My pleasure. Anything I can do to get that movie on more screens, yeah.
It's amazing. It's a masterpiece.
It's so good.
I loved every minute of the movie.
And even more specifically, and this is the scene that we're going to talk about today, the Ferris wheel scene, sort of as a totem for Orson Welles' entire every second that he's on screen in that movie is just A plus stuff.
Are you able to give a quick synopsis of The Third Man, like a quick rundown of what the movie's about? And it's okay if we actually give some spoilers. I mean, spoiler alert. There's going to be spoilers in this discussion for these next 2 films. Spoiler. Although we will try to, I guess, I don't know. Spoiler now. And if you don't want to know anything about the movie, I can't recommend strongly enough that you stop whatever you're doing, watch the movie, and then pop back on and join us because that's, brilliant piece of film. But that said, we're going to spoil stuff starting now. The basic story is Joseph Cotten plays a American writer who writes like pulp westerns, coming to Vienna right after World War II. So it's a very war-torn city, and he is there on the promise of a job from his childhood friend Harry Lime. When he gets there, he learns that Lime is dead. But he starts asking some questions. And it's such a great character name too, like from a screenwriting perspective.
Harry
like
Lime.
I just love the name, like Harry Lime. Yeah, it's just
isn't it so distinctive?
It's so distinct.
And the fact that he is Harry and he's Holly, and the way that they play on that over the course of the movie, where it's these similar names, but they're kind of flipped in this way, where Alita Valley's character, keeps calling Holly Harry, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, so he starts sniffing around, doesn't feel right to him, and he uncovers something. He uncovers that things are not as they seem, shall we say. And Orson Welles, playing Harry Lime, is revealed to not be in fact dead, and makes one of the great entrances into the movie. An hour and 10 minutes into the film, is the first time you see like the top billed movie star in the movie,
which is incredible.
Yeah,
and it takes a lot of balls as a screenwriter to be like, all right, we're not going to reveal him until an hour and 10 minutes in.
It really does. Well, I think the only comparison for something like this is like Kevin Spacey at Seven.
True.
Which we not going to spoil too many movies here, but
well, if they haven't seen Seven, I have to question: is it somebody that's actually an audience of this podcast?
Point taken. Anyway, so the scene that we're going to talk about in greater depth is the Ferris wheel scene. It's the only scene in the movie in which Harry Lime speaks. His character looms so large over the entire movie, but he only has any lines to speak of in one 5-minute scene of just. I can't think of a character whose screen time was so compressed, and yet he was so such a prominent feature of the film.
Such incredible presence.
So well that you'll find him on near the top of every like sort of best villain, best character, all those sorts of things. Those kinds of lists.
It's so amazing.
So well done. Yeah, is there any,
basically Holly is confronting Harry Lime on the Ferris wheel. It's like they're having their first sort of like, well, what is going on with you sort of conversation. And Holly's been probing into it with the police, and Harry Lime's sort of a racketeer, or he's become a racketeer unbeknownst to Holly, who was surprised that he was involved with sort of illegal things. And there's sort of an interesting premise that's set up in the beginning of the film, because it's the post-war, and they're in Vienna, right? And but it's like there's 4 different sections, one that's run by the Americans, one that's run by
I think it's British, French, Russian, and American.
That's right. Good call.
Mm-hmm. That backdrop of the war, right, I think is kind of one of the keys to this scene, in that it's key to their relationship. I remember I wrote a whole my favorite paper that I ever wrote in college was on this film, and sort of the idea that this film is really about friendship, right? And it's these two friends who have not seen each other since before the war. One experienced it in Europe, one experienced it in America. One is sort of a downbeat, disillusioned person at heart, but the other one is just completely, they're a completely changed person, they're unrecognizable, and they've morally fallen apart, right? Harry Lime is one of the things I love about this scene. He's using these little heartburn pills, these tablets, and he's on his last one. He's run out of these heartburn pills. He's absolutely at his end, and he does, and is almost unrecognizable to his friend.
I really love the dialogue in this scene. It's so fantastic when he's basically talking about how he, as a racketeer, he's not that different than the government is, and he says, "Well, they have their 5-year plans, and so do I." And then Holly says, "Well, you used to believe in God." He's like, "Well, I still do believe in God, old man. Yeah, I believe in God and mercy and all that. But the dead are happy or dead." And to me, that deeply ties into a theme that I've always been talking about, is how justification to me is the root of all evil, because people just justify bad deeds,
what they want to do,
and they start just justifying more and more sort of messed up things.
Yeah, and you can see that spirit of the war that I mentioned earlier, right? Where Holly has he kind of emerged from it, his principles unbroken, his faith not really tested in the same way. Maybe faith is the wrong word, but sort of belief in sort of humanity and ideals, things like that. Whereas Harry comes out and he's like, well, I do believe in God, but who cares if people are dead?
Right.
Death is so inevitable to him. It's sort of so soaked in. You can feel the trauma of an entire continent in his sort of half of this equation.
Yeah.
And a word for Orson Welles is really, one thing I love about his acting, I think he's the only actor in classical Hollywood who is not afraid to just step onto people's lines and just totally jump in and like interrupt characters, right? Because and so many times in this scene, there's no daylight at all between Joseph Cotton's line and Orson Welles' line, and it just brings that tension so close together, and it keeps the cat and mouse going so well.
True. Yeah, and I just love. Yeah, I love his acting, his performance. He's so natural, and there's such a level of authenticity.
The confidence that he has as he's just walking around that Ferris wheel, and knowing that he's going from, I'm reaching out to my friend, I'm justifying myself, I'm considering whether I'm going to murder my childhood friend right here and right now.
Right.
And he jumps between all these different spots effortlessly. So great.
Yeah, it is great.
And then Joseph Cotton is a perfect counterpoint where he's this very sincere, even their two faces, like Orson Welles has this this shine on his face the whole time, a sort of mischief grin, and Joseph Cotton is he has those great sort of slate features, right, where he's just sort of serious and earnest the entire time and wondering, like who this person is now that he doesn't recognize.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's almost like I don't want to compare it to like, well, maybe let me make that comparison to, it's almost like Breaking Bad, like Walter White. It's like, like a protagonist turning into an antagonist, but it's like he had this vision of his friend of like, oh yeah, he was a great guy and he saved my life and that sort of thing. And, I owe it to him to find out what happened. But then when he meets him, he sees that he's actually alive and not dead and sees what he's turned into. And, the complexities of like, well, how well did I really know this guy, or did this guy become this way? I mean, the nuance.
I think that's a great reference for that transformation. Yeah,
it's definitely ahead of its time, that film.
Oh yeah, they were not. Occasionally you'll see characters that are really comfortable sitting in sort of these complicated dark places, right, and reckoning with that. Bogart in A Lonely Place comes to mind. Robert Mitchum was someone who would go there. He'd do like Night of the Hunter and really,
he was great.
Take you to a place that classical Hollywood was not, by and large, comfortable going.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's ever been done in such a sort of layered way that is both unbelievably efficient and simple. It's a 5-minute scene, and it's all that this character has. But you can unwrap it for hours, right? Where like even there's a moment when he slides open the door, and as he's sort of he's simultaneously weighing whether to kill Joseph Cotton while also trying to justify his racketeering. He looks down and he says, "Would you really feel anything if one of those dots stopped moving?" And that's
profound.
Sort of how he, yeah. But the film has been setting you up to disagree with him,
right,
in these really subtle, brilliant ways. Because obviously, you disagree with him on moral terms generally, no matter what, right? But like the ways that the movie it lingers throughout on these just shots of people in alleyways, looking at people walking by, and shots of like someone eating a sandwich on the side of the road. Women poking out of behind doorways and like these just tired faces of people on the street. Those are the dots, right? Those are those dots that he's talking about, and you've seen them up close, and it's sort of the moon on their stubble, right? Like these beautiful portraits that pass quickly, but they don't need to be there for the story, but they're there to kind of preload your response to that statement, right? That these people are more than dots. You see their faces up close.
Well put.
Thank you. And then even beyond that, there are times when you do get sort of these shots from above that render people on the ground to be like dots. But one thing that's so brilliant about this movie is that they only bring those perspectives in when they're either talking about, looking at, or alluding to Harry himself, right? So he becomes a dot in some of those other shots.
Right. That's so interesting.
Like, I don't know if you remember the moment when they're at the Porters and they're talking about who was the third man, right? Who was that third man who was there when the death happened? And then he looks out the window and says, it could have been anyone, right? And you see that dot view from extreme overhead shot.
Yeah.
But they're talking about Harry, right? Yeah. Harry could have been anyone.
Exactly.
I don't know. It's such a good scene.
Such a good scene. Such a great film. And it's funny because I was going to text you as soon as I watched the movie. That Ferris wheel scene, like I was just going to text you because that also blew me away. So it's kind of cool that that's one of the scenes that you wanted to talk about on the cast today. But no surprise because it's so iconic, so amazing. And
yeah, for sure. And it has one of the great improvised lines is Orson Welles' last line in that whole scene. And you can kind of tell it's improvised because it doesn't totally feel of a piece, and it feels very much of something that Orson Welles would think about and want to say. But you know, in Italy under 30 years, they had in Italy under the borders for 30 years, I should say, they had murder, terror, bloodshed, and produced the Renaissance. In Switzerland, they had 500 years of democracy and peace.
And produced
the Cuckoo Clock.
Produced the Cuckoo Clock. Yeah, it's a classic. So, it's amazing.
And
actually kind of true. It makes you think about conflict and art and creativity.
And it's more a part of, it's more of Harry Lime, like you say, justifying himself.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the last thing I'll say on this scene, I think you could tell the entire story of Harry Lime in 4 facial expressions from Orson Welles from this movie. You know, if you just sort of line them up, and the grin that he makes when he enters the scene, and then in this moment, the recognition and change in his face when Joseph Cotton tells them that they dug up his coffin and that they know he's not there. You know, there's this really great just shattering of his confidence that happens.
Yeah, it's a great moment.
And you can just sort of see how just totally at his wit's end he is and how much stuff is behind the curtain that we don't see with Harry Lime. Like, you know, how did he get like this? What happened to him during the war?
Yeah.
Anyway, tangent.
It's interesting stuff, and I agree. Nice, man. So
awesome.
So let's talk about the second movie.
Okay, cool.
Let's talk Vertigo.
The second movie is Vertigo. Should we do a summary of this, or is this?
Yeah, do a quick recap because
quick
the plot.
Summary.
I mean, although it's such a, there's so many nuances, there's so many complicated things, but in a way, it's also simple too. It's like there's a simplicity to it.
And it's one of those movies where, like, if you just tell someone the plot, they're like, "Hey, that's a great movie. That's a." You know,
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean because this is also another movie.
Doesn't sound like much, does it?
When I first watched it, I was in my early 20s, I think. But I was also, I think I was watching it with like a group of cousins, and it was like after Thanksgiving, and it's like it's not the kind of movie you could just watch as you're like kind of chit chatting or having conversations. You know, like
right. It kind of demands a notepad.
It demands like your total attention at the minimum. Watching it with the lights off. To me, that's the new litmus. That's when I'm thinking about these movies that I've seen in the past. Like, was I watching it with the lights off, or was I watching it when the lights were on? Because both The Third Man and Vertigo, the first time I watched them, the lights were on. So that means that they couldn't have had my complete attention. So then watching them again, I made sure that the lights were off, and that's all I was doing was watching these films.
Nice. It makes so much bigger difference than you'd think, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know what it is, but when the lights are on, there's just so much stuff visually competing for your attention, even if it's just like, you know, a book in the corner of the room that's just, you know, brightly colored something or whatever.
I think I'm probably never going to watch a movie again with the lights on if I could avoid it. I mean, there's times when you can't if you're on an airplane or something like that. But if I could avoid it, you know, because I don't
know what it is, but it makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference.
And as a terrible segue, there were early film theorists thought of the lights being off as hypnosis, Hitchcock, vertigo, kind of connects. Doesn't
Yes,
really,
no, it
but
does connect, and actually, I'm glad that you've made
it's a
that connection.
non-podcaster's effort to reach out to the medium here.
No, it's good. And actually, it's something that I've talked about quite a lot. Maybe I'm sure we've talked offline about this, that my philosophy about film tapping into the subconscious, not just the conscious, but the subconscious, and how it's a form that should, at its highest levels, also tap into the subconscious. And by the use of sound design, by the use of visuals, by, the subtleties of it, I think at the highest levels, and Vertigo is just such a iconic example, and it's widely regarded by many people as being one of the greatest films of all time, and rightfully so.
For sure, and no one was more interested in those subconscious levels than Hitchcock.
Yes.
That was more than a hobby horse of his. That was a deep fascination, and you never see that more clearly than you do in this movie, and particularly in this scene we want to talk about, which we'll skim through a quick synopsis first. Jimmy Stewart is a private. Spoilers, by the way. Spoilers in every direction. So mute now or forever hold your peace. Jimmy Stewart is a private detective who is hired by a friend of his to monitor his wife's seemingly very strange behaviors. She's fascinated with death, all these sorts of things. He follows her. She thinks that she is like the reincarnation of an ancestor of hers hundreds of years ago, it seems. Long story short, they wind up falling in love, and she then dies in this really sudden way. She falls from a height, and he's, the whole title of the movie comes from his fear of heights. He's trying to get over his partner plummeting to his death. Anyway, she dies. He's unbelievably depressed. And then one day he sees a girl on the street who looks just like her.
Except with
but her
brunette
hair's
hair.
different.
Yeah,
her hair is different, her makeup's different, her little style is different, but her face looks just like her. And over the next half of the movie, or actually it's probably the last third of the movie, he's trying to, he takes her to get her hair done. He buys her new clothes to match what the woman who died looked like. And without going farther than we have to get to this scene is, I just sort of call it the green light scene, when she finally puts on the old clothes of his, now dead former lover, and comes out of the hotel bathroom in the new clothes, and he sees her for the first time. And the sort of that moment is, nothing happens, nothing is said, but it's so richly colored and lit, and the sound, the Bernard Herrmann soundtrack really swells into this big repetition of the main kind of musical theme of the movie. And that's where we are.
It's so hypnotic, that scene, and the use of the
really
mirror is really incredible because of the green glow that kind of foreshadows Judy's total transformation into Madeline. By the time that you see her end up emerging from the bathroom, and you have that glimmering white green light on her, and almost ghostly like, and then they embrace each other, and Scotty loses and he just submits to his desires.
Bizarre, dark, kind of twisted thing, right? Where because I want to do a deep dive on that green light, because I have a lot of thoughts about that green light.
Nice. It's without a doubt one of the most cinematic moments in the history of film.
And it's beautiful, simply put. Just like, it's stunning, because Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak, and the way that they sort of approach each other so tentatively, but it's bizarre, but and it's beautiful. It's on its own terms, but so much of the meaning of that moment comes from things not in that moment, and sort of things that really are a product of Hitchcock's fascination and with sort of repeated topics. He has like this stable of things that he really returns to. He's the ultimate tinkerer, right? So do you mind if I sort of dive in on the green light?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, because the use of color is super interesting. His use of colors.
And it makes the scene.
Yeah.
You know, it's a different scene if it doesn't have that pale, deathly green light absolutely flooding into the room from a neon sign outside. It's bouncing off Jimmy Stewart's tie and his eyes, you know.
Yeah,
And his
exactly.
eyes turn green in that moment. So great.
Yeah.
So not only has green been a huge color throughout that movie, right, where he uses these character tags, right, where
right, what like Scotty
Stewart's
has
color is
kind of
red.
like red, which is kind of like a sense of danger, sense of romance and love, you know, and then
and Madeline's is green, right,
which traditionally is kind of represents like obsession, envy, desire, but in this film, to me, it sort of takes on this ephemeral sort of ghostly quality in terms of his desire.
Oh, for sure. And I think it rolls all of those into one and sort of plays and changes them as it pleases, right? Because the shades change. You know, Madeline starts out in this rich emerald dress, you know, and it's this, you know, you can talk about sort of the green-eyedness of Scotty when he sees her, and but it's, you know, green is both life and death. You know, like living things are green,
right? Yeah,
but ghosts are green. And you go from this really vibrant, alive emerald, the green of a car, things like that, to the green changes in this moment to something that's just pale and deathly, strange.
Also interesting to note that red and green are opposites, complementary colors on the color wheel.
And the eyes connect them immediately, you know, and when you see her big, you know, billowing green dress in this richly dark red room of this restaurant, you know, it's really striking, and it ties the two of them together from the start, you know. But even more than that, right? This is the culmination of a lot of his fascinations throughout multiple movies, where not only is it sort of the culmination of that pattern within the movie, this is a blonde replacing a blonde. You know, a woman sort of making herself look like a lost blonde, which, you know, Hitchcock famously cycled through so many different actresses in kind of pursuit of this type, right? Where he would use he had Grace Kelly in a lot of his American films until she left to be, you know, Princess of Monaco.
Right. And there was something interesting to me toward like how Madeline, even though totally different in personality and temperament to his blonde friend Midge, who was his college friend / former fiance, but, you know, completely different in terms of personality. There's still that blonde hair. There's a common denominator there.
Yeah,
and that's no accident.
It's not. And there's another. It's funny. Hitchcock, you know, when he puts glasses on a woman, there's a bespectacled woman that recurs in a lot of his films, like Strangers on a Train, this film. I don't know what he sort of sees in that, but there's sort of this archetype that Midge is filling as well that has been evolving through a lot of his filmography.
Yeah.
Because there's always like some like overly talkative younger sister, right, who wears glasses, who doesn't really know when to say the socially appropriate thing. And Midge is kind of in that tradition. So there's these two archetypes of women that run throughout his film, and the attempt to turn Judy, the second woman that Scotty encounters, back into sort of the icy blonde, beautiful, but very cold Madeline mimics, you know, in many ways the pattern Hitchcock had of you know, he'd replace Grace Kelly. He eventually became obsessed in a really creepy way with Tippi Hedren, right? And this movie is between his sort of loss of Grace Kelly and finding Tippi Hedren. So he's cycling through actresses in the same way, and that's fascinating.
It is.
But we haven't even gotten to the green light. And I feel like I feel terrible, like I'm sort of
go for it,
monopolizing things here.
Not at all, no.
But so the green light, okay. I love this because it's the culmination of really everything he's done with color film up to that point. He begins his first color film in 1948 with Rope, which is a really cool movie. Murder story in which, in the final scene, it all takes place in one apartment, made to look like it's one shot actually. In the final scene, when it's another Jimmy Stewart film, he's unmasking the killers, right? He's sort of, bringing them in his way. There's a sign outside.
That's
that
amazing.
apartment.
First of all, we have to take a moment to unpack that, because he made his first color film just 9 years before this movie, right? Or 11 years rather, but either
Something
way,
like
just like about like a decade before this movie. And then he makes this movie that I think any film student that's trying to understand color and color theory
absolutely
should watch this as a textbook example that does it better than 99.9% of films being made right now in 2020, because
absolutely.
There's a lot of colors, there's a lot of amazing stylistic things, but just the purposeful use of color in this film is outstanding.
And all before digital color grading.
Yes, right.
All this was either done with practicals or with light.
Yeah, also noteworthy.
Yeah,
good point, Bobby.
So like in it now, if we want to do things like that, we can control it so much more, right? You can sort of filter out the reds or blues or whatever in post.
Yeah.
But they had to set this up to do it live. It was so cool.
I know, it is so cool. So it's like when he did start working with color, it's like, man, did he like master that?
Yeah, he and it didn't take long.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, as you're saying, he mastered it, and it's the product of his tinkering, right? Where there are ways that he uses color that I think really culminate in that scene. Beginning at the very beginning with Rope, and that over the course of that movie, because it's kind of shot in real time, it goes from being afternoon to night. And at the end of the movie, the outside of the apartment is dark, but some neon lights come on. And as Jimmy Stewart's giving his big speech revealing the killers, or dressing down the killers really, bright monochrome lights keep blasting in repetitively. Like there'll be a white light, and then a red light, and then maybe a green light, and it sort of fills the room in the same way a similar way, I should say, that this green light does. So in the first chance that he had to play with the color of light, his first thought is, let me flood this room with color at this climactic scene for Jimmy Stewart. And it's exactly what we have happening in Vertigo.
Yes. And
it's remarkable because then you see him carrying it through with other films. Like there's a scene in The Man Who Knew Too Much early on when they're at this hotel and this suspicious guy shows up at the door unannounced. There's this, again, green light flooding in from outside that's just twinging everything eerily to just give you the sense that this may seem like it's going great, but something is wrong. Something's about to happen. There's cause for unease.
So apparently Hitchcock spent a week filming one of the scenes where Madeline's staring at the portrait in the museum at the Palace Legion of Honor, just to get the lighting right.
Wow.
Just to get that precise. So that's his attention to detail was pretty much unprecedented, I think.
Yeah, he at the very least, no one else, no one outdid him in that regard. There are other people who Kubrick is obviously the famous example, and
right. But up until that point,
really
like
precise,
Kubrick was, that's true. I mean, Kubrick was starting to make films,
But he wasn't sort of at his shining level of just like, I'm going to do this 1,000 times.
Well, Kubrick was outstanding too. But I mean, to date, like I'm talking in the context of up until that time.
Yeah.
In the history of movies, it's just he really changed the game, and it's kind of crazy to me. And I didn't realize this until recently. I've talked about this on another episode of the podcast because we had Kent Jones, who's a Hitchcock historian and made the great documentary called Hitchcock Truffaut. So I didn't realize that Hitchcock wasn't critically that respected,
He was not.
which is
and
fucking
this
mind blowing
movie
here
was a failure.
here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And Vertigo was a critical failure and a commercial failure, which is also mind blowing because it's like, man, you know, I guess it was just really ahead of its time, you know.
It was, and it's a movie that it barely makes sense out of the context of his filmography, right? Like we said, if I just told you the plot of the movie, you'd be like, really? That's all that happened, you know?
Well, I'll admit, I mean, Bobby, you've had more sophisticated taste at a younger age than I did when I did in my early 20s, because I didn't have the real appreciation for the film in my early 20s that I did from watching it again more recently. My wife loved it as well. She's, you know, and but it really it's totally remarkable. It's like for people that haven't seen it, you really have to see it. You really have to just sit down and truly watch it. It is strange in a way, but like it's like beautifully strange.
It is, and it's one of those films that so much of its quality comes from the textural things of it, not so much the you know, as the
right,
narrative,
the nonverbal,
right?
exactly. There's a lot of, and that's what I love about it too. I mean, the fact that Hitchcock could really tell stories not just from it's sparse with dialogue. You know, it's like really there's so many scenes that there is no dialogue where he's just driving and following her, and then you hear that amazing soundtrack by Bernard Herrmann on the score, and it's just it's so profoundly cinematic, and just that scene where, you know, it's dark, and then he opens up the door to the flower shop, and then he's like, you know, spying on her when she's in the flower shop, and that's just breathtaking.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that the sort of the reliance on those elements is why this film is pretty hard to categorize, because I know that there's a lot of debate over whether or not this is a noir. I will kind of go to my grave, A, both waiting for someone to care about my opinion on this, and B, arguing that it's not a noir.
Yeah, I didn't perceive it to be a noir. I didn't even know that was a debate, to be perfectly honest. But it was.
Well,
it wasn't
it
wasn't really my impression of it. You know,
because it's so specific to Hitchcock, right?
Right, exactly. It's so Hitchcock.
And there's a lot of debate about Hitchcock in general and noir and whether any of his films count. I would argue that there are definitely some, or there are very likely some that do, but this is not. Yeah, this is so wrapped around his own subconscious and his own history of work.
Also important to note that. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. Actually, go.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say this is infamous for. This is where the dolly zoom was invented. The infamous dolly zoom.
Of course, yeah. Have we not talked about that yet?
So that's pretty.
The Vertigo shot, yeah.
Famously also used by Scorsese in films like Goodfellas and so many films since then. But you know, the first time it was used ever.
It got its start. Yeah, I mean, it's tempting to try to kind of come up with a link between this and the Ferris wheel scene, right?
You know, it is, and it's funny because I was thinking about some links as we were just talking about The Third Man. That, you know, the fact like Holly, Harry, and then in this film, like Judy, Madeline, but then also Madeline, Midge, like the blonde hair and the blonde hair. Like there's sort of, and then just following somebody, you know. There are some common themes, even though they're very sort of different films.
Well, and one that I would get at, and I think that this is kind of maybe why full disclosure, I did not sort of think of them at the time in conjunction to each other, but I went in sort of having chosen the Ferris wheel scene, and then this was the next one that came to mind. Maybe something has to do with there are two scenes about one person recognizing a change in another person, or kind of recreate another person in somebody else, right? Like you know, Joseph Cotton is recognizing that his friend, even though he's not dead and he thought he was dead, is actually deader than he thought he was, right? Because the friendship is dead, you know, and the person that he knew is dead, even if the person standing next to him. And Scotty in in Vertigo, Jimmy Stewart is unable to accept that the woman he loved is dead, and he tries to bring her back in this very, strange way of dressing up somebody else, and the dissonance of that in that room. I don't know. I think that there is a link.
Yeah.
There's of people sort of confronted with or trying to create a change in other people.
Agreed. And both of them end on very impactfully,
Oh yeah.
Each film.
Yeah. And each film ends. Look, we've spoiled enough already.
Yeah, true.
We can go there. Just in case that there's anybody listening to this who has listened to this far and not minded the spoilers or not been spoiled and would have been spoiled by what's coming next, I don't think that can possibly fit anybody's description. But in case, another spoiler warning.
Yeah.
Both end with one person causing the ultimate death of the opposite number in this equation, right? Like, Joseph Cotton kills Harry Lime. Hal Martin kills Harry Lime in the end. And Jimmy Stewart
causes the death of Judy.
New Madeline, which is old Madeline, back up to the top of that tower and causes her death.
Exactly.
And she gets them, both weirdly have to do with heights. I don't know if that's relevant, but
yeah,
you sort of get that dot view in Vertigo.
Yeah.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, man. There's such good scenes and such good films.
Such great films that even if you've listened to this far and you haven't seen these movies, to me, a film isn't just about the plot. I mean, we could talk all day long about these plot and spoilers, but that's not the reason that you watch the film. The reason that you watch the film is to take in that whole cinematic experience, to be sort of hypnotized by the sound and the images. And
absolutely.
And both of them achieve that.
These moments do those things so well.
Yeah, exactly.
Rewatching those scenes, and I rewatched The Third Man yesterday. In the run up to this, I've seen that. I don't know how many times I've seen that movie, but every time it just kind of hits you like new. Even if you know what's coming next, it's.
Now, when you rewatch it on this, now this is just like some inside stuff because me and you were talking about, like, when you rewatch The Third Man. Did you pay attention to that actor's face that was the police officer that was familiar with Holly's books? Yes. Did you see his face when he got his hands on the letters and he was saying, no,
I did.
Don't worry, we don't read that. That's just evidence. But like, it's almost like he could hardly contain his excitement to like read all those letters. And it makes it, to me as the audience, it makes it even that much more sort of like, oh man.
Because I had never noticed. I had always sort of interpreted that moment a little differently. That he was smiling to be nice, and don't worry, we're like doctors. We're kind of, we don't register this. But that now that you pointed that out, that is interesting, and sort of that smile can read differently now.
Yeah, because the guy was a reader. He had read all of Holly's books, so it's clearly a guy who enjoys reading.
Yeah.
And this
and
is
to have him be the one who takes the letters, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many little grace notes like that throughout the movie where,
That's what I love about films like that, the reward repeat watchability, like The Third Man or Vertigo. And, there's always more information or to take in. It still rewards repeated watchings.
Of course. And the beautiful thing is, and this is getting a bit saccharine here, but every time you watch a movie, you are a slightly different person. So there's a variable that changes. The movie doesn't change, but the person watching it does. And you can, as you've said, your experience with these films has been, when you've watched them at different points or in different ways, your experience of it changes.
Totally.
And it sounds like in these cases,
and for sure, my
richer.
level, it's gotten richer. Yeah. My level of appreciation for the films has gotten richer, then, my own tastes have changed over the years.
Yeah.
For sure, for the better, because when I was much younger, I never even was exposed to foreign films, for example. And now I can't imagine a life of not knowing foreign films,
For sure. And I'm actually sort of to tie back into some of our earlier discussion of when these movies kind of came into our lives. We're talking about when we kind of got interested in this stuff. remember the first time I saw The Third Man, it said my dad called me into the room to show me this movie where the music sounded like SpongeBob music, and I was like 8 or something like that. And
was that his way of just tricking you? Was it the same thing as like what he did to like? He's like, oh yeah, it's midnight, but it was only 9 o'clock. He's like, oh, by the way, this is like SpongeBob SquarePants. You'll love it.
Oh man, could be. But he's like, yeah, here, I'm gonna show you this movie. The music sounds just like SpongeBob. You're gonna love it.
How old were you when you first watched The Third Man?
Oh, I don't know. I must have been like 10. Or I don't know if I watched the whole thing at that point, but that was when I first sort of became aware of it or something like that.
Yeah. That you,
like and you then heard that I kind of just remembered it forever as, that movie with the Ferris wheel, and I liked that. I don't know why I liked that. But,
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I was definitely exposed to some great films when I was a kid. Like I remember watching, even when I was 9 or 10, watching Spartacus and things like that, and really loving that.
I've never seen that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, just certain things like that. Or like going to the movies and watching Forrest Gump when it came out, and just that blew me away, you know.
Mm-hmm. I think all, like, you know, sort of warm childhood memories are precious in their way, but I think that for people who love film and love cinema, those early, or even if they're not the earliest, but sort of those moments as a kid when you get to kind of be brought into those things, and kind of have contact with them for the first time, I think it's so special. And I think that almost everybody that I know who really loves cinema has those kind of early memories that they carry around.
Totally. 100%. Well, Bobby, this has been an amazing talk, man.
Oh, it's been a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man.
Sounds good, man.
Well, thanks again so much.
Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
Stay safe, everybody. Thanks for listening, everybody.
For sure.
Thank you for listening to the FilmSEEN podcast with your host, F. Kota. Today's episode featured screenwriter Bobby Peretti. Original music by Yuri Rybak. Supervising producer Shailene Gupta. Executive producer Jeff Cutler. Sponsored by Alphabet City Films.